Star Wars The Mandalorian and Gorgu, the first Star Wars film in nearly 6.5 years, has finally released in theaters. I was actually in Rome when the movie came out, and I got to see it a couple of days early on May 20th when it released in Europe. That was a really fun experience, but now that I'm back, I have a lot to say about this movie. In today's video, I want to go over the good and the bad. There was a lot riding on this film. This was Star Wars' return to the big screen in nearly 6.5 years, and a lot of fans, including me, were really hopeful to see our favorite franchise return to the box office once again. And no one was more aware of this than director Jon Favreau, the lead architect behind the entire Mandoverse pocket of Star Wars we've all been living in over the past 7 years. After the sequel trilogy left a lot of fans divided, it was up to him and George Lucas's protege Dave Filoni to cleanse the palate of general audiences with a film that promised to re-energize the franchise with a fun and exciting classic Star Wars adventure. A back-to-basics approach, if you will. And well, overall, I think Jon and Dave succeeded here. I really enjoyed The Mandalorian and Gorgu.
I liked it.
It felt like a greatest hits of Star Wars as a whole. There's a bevy of cool planets and locations, exotic creatures, lots of droids and mechs, slick action sequences, starfighter dogfights, and most importantly, a lot of emotional and heartwarming moments. Din Djarin and Grogu have never felt more compelling as a father-son duo, nor has the Star Wars world felt so weird and pulpy in some of the best ways. First, the positives. Ludwig Göransson raised the bar to a whole new level with the film's score. The themes and motifs he developed for the Mandalorian TV show were phenomenal, and they carry over here in an even bigger and grander way. It's hard to top John Williams, but if nothing else, this movie's soundtrack has to be up there as one of the coolest. I found myself going back and listening to the Shikari track over and over. Such a cool piece of music to accompany Din and Grogu as they fly down to the planet. I know that there were a lot of concerns that this movie would feel cheap or visually lackluster compared to other modern Star Wars films, and while there were certainly moments where I could see the film's modest budget poking through, there was a palpable step up in production quality and visual fidelity over the TV show. Sets were more robust, planets and locations felt larger, and action scenes felt more dynamic. One of the things that really impressed me was just how much variety of locations and planets we got to see. We had the ice planet with the Imperial Remnant, the New Republic's base on Adelphi, Din and Grogu's house on Navarro, and an entirely new planet called Shikari. The filmmakers explains that Shikari was designed after Prohibition-era Chicago, and you can really see that influence coming through. It was definitely a different look for Star Wars, but I think they pulled it off and made Shikari feel visually distinct from other big city planets like Coruscant. But I think the best planet, and coincidentally the planet with the best scenes from the movie, was Nal Hutta. Visually, it looked very impressive. A lush green swamp filled with dangerous creatures lurking around every corner. We've all heard of Nal Hutta, the throne world and home planet of the Hutts, and finally seeing it here in live action in such a major way was fantastic. The Hutt Palace turned out to be a really cool set piece, especially the sequence where Din is captured and thrown into the pit with the dragon snake. I am a huge fan of vehicle and trooper designs in Star Wars, and this movie certainly did not disappoint in that department either. The new Imperial Remnant troopers like the AT-RT drivers and the snow troopers with their masks removed were cool additions to the trooper roster. Seeing U-Wings and X-Wings back in action was great, and even that deep cut appearance of the INT-4 Interceptor, a ship that comes from a 1982 Kenner action figure toy, was a really neat Easter egg. Speaking of Easter eggs, including all of the Dedrick pieces as actual aliens that Din and Rada fight against in the Shikari fighting pits was amazing. As someone who grew up religiously watching the Clone Wars and Rebels, who has a strong affinity for returning side characters like Zeb, Rada, and Embo, I really appreciated the appearance of these characters in the movie. Zeb's personality and mannerisms perfectly carried over from animation to live action. He looked great and sounded great. Embo moved and fought in the same way he did in the Clone Wars. He was a great bounty hunter to pull in here working for the Hutts. And Rada, well, we didn't see much of him in the Clone Wars movie considering he was a literal infant, but I think they positioned him well in the story. I know the casting announcement of Jeremy Allen White as Rada raised a lot of eyebrows initially, including mine, and while in the first 10 or 15 minutes of hearing Rada speak, it was kind of throwing me off, by the end of the movie I thought his voice worked pretty well. But even with all that said, I can also understand that none of these cameos really matter. Or should I say, the pre-existence of these characters before the movie takes place doesn't really matter. You genuinely don't need to know who the hell any of these people are to appreciate their appearances and roles in the story. Zeb slots right into a Chewbacca-like alien sidekick who doesn't need much exposition to find charming and a cool side character. Rada is immediately identified as Jabba the Hutt's son. That's all you really need to know. A character who's struggling to step out of his father's shadow. And throughout the film, Imbo is simply referred to as the Hunter, who, like Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back, appears with very little context, speaks just a few lines, and serves as a badass side villain our protagonists must fight against. Just like Chewbacca or Boba Fett or Jabba the Hutt when the original trilogy first came out, you don't need to know who these people are or a spin-off series to know where they came from. Everything you need is right there in front of you. None of these characters' appearances felt forced or overdone. Nothing really detracted from Din and Grogu in their relationship. A lot of people would be quick to chalk all of these references up to nostalgia bait or creative bankruptcy, but that wasn't my takeaway at all. To me, it felt more like a great homage to all the things that make the Star Wars universe so unique and just fun to watch. Nothing felt forced or obnoxious, just a fun nod to all the Star Wars that's come before. There's something really unique and special that comes with watching a Star Wars project. The world of Star Wars, with its incredible blending of so many different influences, is something that can't really be replicated in any other franchise. We have to remember that Star Wars itself didn't emerge out of a vacuum, but was heavily inspired by a huge pool of other kinds of stories. It's an epic space opera that blends westerns, samurai films, classic space serials, and even Greek mythology. I think the Mandalorian TV show and the Mandalorian and Gorgu film lean heavily into that pulpier side of Star Wars, drawing much of their tone and visual style from Golden Age space serials like Flash Gordon. I mean, this is what Star Wars is. This is the core of its storytelling language. A lot of the criticisms I'm seeing levied against the film, like its more lighthearted tone or overabundance of goofy-looking aliens, could also be applied to other Star Wars movies like Return of the Jedi, for example. But I definitely agree with the consensus that this movie felt like a very safe choice for Disney to make for Star Wars' return to the big screen. But even if the Mandalorian and Grogu aren't your favorite Star Wars characters, you just can't help but be drawn into their story and the bond that's developed between them over all these years. So those were some of my positives. What about the negatives? Well, I think the Mandalorian and Grogu movie suffers in a lot of the same ways as the show does. Dialogue is often stiff and stilted, and I found Sigourney Weaver's performance as Colonel Ward particularly lacking in that department. I really wanted to see more out of her and her character. Their narrative structure overall did feel like I was watching an episode of The Mandalorian that was stretched out into a 2-hour runtime. A really good Mandalorian episode, mind you, but nonetheless still felt like I was watching the show in a lot of ways. I think one of the main driving forces behind that was just the story in general. It felt much smaller scale than I was expecting, almost like a side quest. I had imagined that this film would deal with a higher stakes conflict between the New Republic and the Imperial Remnants, this huge conflict that's been slowly brewing over the past several seasons of Disney Plus Star Wars. And sadly, we just did not get that here. The story and narrative did not really extend beyond that Mandoverse Disney Plus bubble. Certain transitions from story beat to story beat felt like I was turning to different pages of a comic book rather than watching a cohesive film script from beginning to end, but maybe that was the idea. The Mandalorian show was always envisioned as a serialized comic book-esque adventure, which naturally lends itself much better to an episodic format like a TV show. The format of a film, however, presents a bigger challenge to this kind of storytelling, because you need to create a satisfying story arc with a clear rising action, obstacles, twists, challenges, and a payoff and resolution that justifies its runtime. And I think The Mandalorian and Grogu is a bit clumsy in this regard. All of the narrative structures are there, but they feel a bit disconnected from one another. Here's the bottom line. I think that this movie is far from perfect. The tone and pacing suffered quite a bit in certain moments of its runtime. Dialogue was stiff, and while the visuals were impressive in a lot of places, they definitely felt closer to the look of a Disney Plus show than a modern Star Wars blockbuster. And the story, while satisfying in the end, was very safe and didn't have a ton of meat on the bone for building out the bigger Star Wars universe. But with that said, I personally really enjoyed The Mandalorian and Grogu. I had fun watching it, and I have had fun discussing it with friends and family. Is this going to place in my top 5 Star Wars movies of all time? Definitely not, but that doesn't mean it was a bad film. It was the first Star Wars movie in theaters in almost 7 years, and I think it delivered on the excitement I had for a new theatrical Star Wars experience. I saw a tweet about the movie that really stuck with me, which is that somewhere out there, some kids are seeing their very first Star Wars movie in theaters right now. This is a whole new generation's first step into the larger Star Wars world. As much as the 2008 Clone Wars movie gets a lot of flack these days, that was my first cinematic Star Wars experience. And as a kid, going to see that with my friends, we were hooked. We loved every minute of it, and that's what really first swept me away into the galaxy far, far away. Now, as an adult, I look back at that movie and see it for what it was. Not the greatest movie ever made, but something really special at the time. I think as we get older, we lose that perspective about how our younger selves experienced Star Wars and what it meant to us. By that same token, if we take a look at The Mandalorian and Grogu for what it is, Star Wars' first foray back into theaters in nearly 7 years, positioning itself as a summer blockbuster for casual fans to enjoy, I think we can say it succeeded at that level. A back-to-basics Star Wars movie that, while it doesn't do a whole lot to move the franchise in a new direction, successfully rallies audiences back to the Star Wars universe and gives us a fun and action-packed theatrical experience. Well, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on the movie, whether or not it lived up to your expectations, and what you think the film did well, and what you think could have been executed better. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.